Before this story continues, please allow me to be clear about one thing. The story you are about to hear is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes. It is designed to reflect toxic family conflicts and the inner journey of a woman who endured silence for far too long. All characters, events, and situations are entirely fictional and do not represent real people or real cases. The content may be supported by AI tools during the creative and production process. This story does not promote violence, hatred, or harm of any kind. It is told to evoke empathy, reflection, and personal growth, especially for women who have sacrificed, endured, and been hurt within their own families. The entire narrative is built to be advertiser-friendly and compliant with YouTube community guidelines, and it is not intended to defame, target, or imply any real individual. If you see a part of your life in this story, please stay until the end. And if your heart is touched, share your thoughts in the comments, or follow the channel to continue with stories for women who have carried too much and still deserve to be understood and valued. Okay. Now let me tell you what Get Out sounded like in real life. My name is Kedra. I was 17 when it happened, and I am 25 now. I grew up in Parma, in the suburbs outside Cleveland, the kind of place where driveways are shoveled before dawn and neighbors notice if your trash cans are out late. My dad, Raymond Harlow, was 52 back then, a man who believed a house stayed clean if you enforced rules hard enough. My mom, Judith Judy Harlow, was 49 and practiced a quieter kind of control, the kind that calls silence peace. My sister Marlo was 22, pretty confident and always right in the way people mean when they say that someone just has a good head on their shoulders. There was also Walt, a retired mechanic next door who fixed snowblowers for cash, and Mrs. Danner across the street, who used to watch kids and still noticed everything. Christmas Eve. 2017 came with that heavy Ohio cold, the kind that sticks to your lungs. The driveway had a thin glaze of ice, and the house smelled like ham and sugar cookies. I remember thinking about how normal everything looked from the outside. Then my dad opened the door and handed me a bag. Not a suitcase, a bag. It had my school backpack shoved into it and a folded hoodie on top. He did not raise his voice. That was the part that hurt the most. He said, "Get out," just like that. He said it the way you say, "Take the trash to the curb." My mom stood behind him holding a small plastic zip bag with my birth certificate and social security card like she was issuing supplies. My sister was in the hallway with her arms crossed, wearing that face that says, "I tried to help." I asked what I had done. My dad said, "You know what you did. You embarrassed this family. You made your choices." He did not let me grab my phone or my coat. He told me not to make a scene. He said neighbors were watching. When the door closed, it sounded final. No slam, just the click of the lock. I stood there on the icy driveway in sneakers with my breath coming out white and thin. It was not the cold that made my hands shake. It was the way blame felt practiced, like this had been rehearsed without me. At the time, I thought Get Out was about punishment. I thought it erased me. What I did not know then was that it removed the only person who had been quietly keeping their mess from being seen. If you have ever been punished for a lie you did not tell, stay to the end. I did not argue that night. I noticed things. The way my dad would not look me in the eye. The way my mom pressed her lips together like she was holding something back. The way my sister sighed as if this was a burden on her. Those details stayed with me longer than the words. Some parents do not raise children. They raise witnesses to their image. Christmas lights blinked in the windows down the street. Someone laughed inside a house I did not belong to anymore. I walked to Walt's place because it was the only light still on. He opened the door in his socks and said, "Kid, you look cold," without asking questions. That was the first night of a long, quiet lesson. They thought telling me to get out would end the story. It did not. It started the part where facts began to matter, and silence stopped protecting them. The lie did not arrive with drama or shouting or anything that looked obvious at first. It arrived the way most damage does in families like mine, quietly wrapped in something small and believable. A few days before Christmas, my dad called me into the kitchen while my sister Marlo leaned against the counter scrolling on her phone. He held up a receipt from CVS like it was evidence in a courtroom. It showed 2 small charges, cough drops, and a prepaid card. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make anyone panic on its own. He asked me why his card had been used. I said I did not know what he was talking about. Marlo looked up, then sighed and said she had not wanted to bring it up, but she had noticed her card missing earlier that week and thought maybe I had borrowed it and forgotten to say something. Borrowed was the word she used, soft and reasonable. My dad did not ask follow-up questions. He did not check dates or times or locations. He did not ask why a 22-year-old with a job would let her card sit around unattended. He just nodded slowly and said this was disappointing. That was the first lie, and it fit perfectly because it sounded like something a troubled teenager might do and something a responsible older sister might gently forgive. I tried to explain that I had been at school all day and that I paid cash when I bought things, but my dad cut me off and said I was missing the point. The point was that it made us look bad. That was escalation level 1 moral shaming. He did not say thief. He said embarrassment. He said people notice these things. He said if something like this got out, it would reflect on the whole family. My mom Judy stood at the sink, washing a plate that was already clean. She did not turn around. She said nothing. That silence carried more weight than anything else in the room. Marlo kept her eyes down and said she was sure it was just a misunderstanding, but misunderstandings add up. That night my dad told me I needed to think about how my actions affected others. He said trust was earned and easily lost. I went to my room and sat on my bed, staring at the wall, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that comes when you know you are being blamed for something you did not do. But you also know fighting it will only make you look worse. The second lie came the next day, and it came with witnesses. My dad got a voicemail forwarded to him from one of the church ladies, a woman who liked to organize bake sales and ask personal questions. The voicemail was short and choppy, and sounded like me complaining about my family saying they were fake and obsessed with appearances. It was my voice, but it was cut together wrong, the pauses off the tone slightly warped. I had never left that message. Marlo said she had heard me vent before and maybe I had forgotten. My dad listened to it twice and then looked at me like I had slapped him in public. That was escalation level 2, the power threat. He said this kind of disrespect would not be tolerated under his roof. He said he had worked too hard to build a reputation just to have it dragged down by teenage attitude. He said privileges could be taken away, college support, phone access, rides anywhere. He said maybe I needed a wake-up call. My mom finally spoke then, not to defend me, but to suggest we all calm down because it was the holidays. Calm down was her version of choosing sides. Marlo crossed her arms and gave me a look that was almost sympathetic if you did not know her better. I noticed the corner of her mouth lift for just a second. That tiny detail stayed with me. I did not argue. I answered questions when asked and kept my voice even. Inside I felt something crack, not loudly, but in a way that makes you realize this is not about truth anymore. It is about control and image. Some parents do not raise children. They raise witnesses to their image. The final escalation came on Christmas Eve after dinner when the house was full of leftovers and forced cheer. My dad called me into the living room again. This time he did not have receipts or voicemails. He had a decision. He said he could not have someone like me under his roof anymore. He said I was a bad influence on my sister, even though she was older. He said if I wanted to act like I did not care about the family, then I did not get to be part of it. He said, "You are not my daughter if you choose this path." That was escalation level 3, complete rejection. There was no discussion, no appeal. He told me to pack what I needed and leave. I remember the way his voice stayed calm, as if that made the cruelty more acceptable. My mom handed me a small plastic bag with my documents, like she was checking off a list. Marlo stood in the hallway watching with that same practiced concern. It is not the cold outside that stings. It is how familiar the blame feels. I carried my bag out past the Christmas decorations and onto the driveway, knowing this had been decided long before that moment. As I walked away, I remembered something small and strange from earlier that year. My dad had asked me to sign a few random forms because he said my handwriting was neater. Nothing important, he had said, just paperwork. I had signed without reading closely because that is what you do when you are trying to be helpful. I also remembered that I had started keeping copies of things without knowing why, saving emails, taking pictures of documents, filing them away like a habit. At the time, it felt pointless. Standing in the cold that night, it felt like the only thing that was mine. Tell me you have seen a golden child dynamic like this without telling me. Life after getting kicked out did not look dramatic or cinematic. It looked small and repetitive and quiet. I slept on a friend's couch for a few weeks, then moved to a spare room over a garage that smelled like motor oil and damp cardboard. I worked wherever someone would put my name on a schedule. A diner off State Road where the coffee was always burnt and the tips stuck to your fingers with syrup. A self-storage place where I learned the sound of rolling doors and the way people look when they lie about what they keep locked away. A grocery store where my shift started before sunrise and ended with my jacket smelling like produce and disinfectant. I did not tell my story to customers. I did not cry at work. I learned how to keep my head down and my receipts straight. Money came in slowly and left quickly. Tips went into a jar. Bills stacked on the desk by my bed. Nothing was desperate enough to be called suffering, but nothing was comfortable either. That space in between teaches you discipline whether you want it or not. The coat I wore never fully dried. My hands smelled like coffee and cardboard. I learned to count change without looking and to stretch meals without thinking about it. I also learned that getting kicked out does not mean being left alone. The pressure just changes shape. My dad Ray texted me a week after Christmas telling me to drop off my spare key and return a jacket he said I had taken. He added that he did not owe me anything and that this was on me. There was no question mark. My mom Judy sent messages that sounded gentle on the surface but landed heavy. She said I could come home if I apologized and admitted my mistakes. She said families forgive if you meet them halfway. She never named the lie. She never asked if I was okay. She just waited for me to fold. My sister Marlo posted photos on social media that winter of a table set just right and a caption about gratitude and family values. People commented about what a beautiful home they had and how lucky my parents were. I was tagged once and then untagged quietly. That was escalation in a different form, public humiliation without confrontation. I stopped responding to messages that asked me to explain myself. Explaining only gives people room to rewrite you. I focused instead on what I could control. I enrolled at community college because it was affordable and because it did not ask questions about where you came from. I took classes that sounded boring on purpose. Intro to records management, basics of compliance, claims processing. I noticed that boring work has rules and rules do not care about your family narrative. Boring work saves you. It is where facts live. I was good at it because I paid attention. I showed up early, I read instructions twice, I learned how to follow a process without rushing and how to document things so they could not be twisted later. I did not talk much about it when people asked what I was studying. I said office work and left it at that. Over time, that work turned into a job, then another job. I learned how systems talk to each other and where they fail when someone assumes a shortcut will not matter. At home, I built quiet habits. I kept a file folder on my desk, then two, then more. I bought a used scanner from a thrift store and cleaned it until it worked like new. I saved emails even when they seemed unimportant. I took pictures of documents before handing them back. It was not paranoia. It was muscle memory. Once in a while, I would say, I know someone at work when a question came up about paperwork and then change the subject. I did not explain who or why. Financially, I kept things simple. I did not spend money to prove anything. I paid bills on time, even when it meant saying no to other things. That discipline was its own kind of power, even if no one saw it yet. The pressure from my family did not stop. It just lost its volume. My dad stopped texting after I returned the key. My mom sent holiday messages that sounded like invitations but felt like traps. My sister stopped tagging me entirely. In that silence, something else grew. I started to understand how often families rely on the least powerful person to do the most invisible work. The organizing, the signing, the fixing. When that person is gone, the gaps do not fill themselves. I did not think about revenge. I thought about stability. I thought about paper trails and what happens when they break. I thought about how often people confuse trust with convenience. There is a difference between being trusted and being useful. I learned both. The value point came slowly and without drama. Keep your records. Do not sign what you do not understand. Do not let anyone rush you with words like family or loyalty. No one ever said that out loud to me. I learned it by watching what happened when I stopped being available. If you are still here, you will understand why one missing signature changed everything. The strange thing about leaving a family like mine is that you do not realize how much unpaid work you were doing until no one is doing it anymore. When I was still living at home, I was the one who sorted mail without being asked, and filed documents into neat stacks on the corner of the desk. I was the one who printed forms when my dad said the printer hated him, and who reminded my mom which envelope needed a stamp and which one needed a signature. I never thought of it as responsibility. It was just what kept the house running smoothly. When I was told to get out, that role disappeared overnight. There was no handoff, no explanation. The assumption was that things would continue as they always had. They did not. My parents had to start doing their own paperwork, and my sister helped in the way she always did, which was quickly and confidently and wrong. Shortcuts replaced order. Guessing replaced checking. The system does not forgive that kind of sloppiness. It notices. By then, I was working through a contractor attached to a county records office, and sometimes on assignments for a small bank compliance vendor. My days were quiet and structured. I reviewed files that came through my queue and flagged inconsistencies the same way I always had. One afternoon, a folder landed on my screen with a familiar last name. I did not react. Familiar names happen. What caught my attention was not the name, but the feel of the document. A signature that looked right at first glance and then slightly off when you slowed down. Not forged badly, just rushed. The timestamp on the confirmation page read December 26, 2017, the day after Christmas. I sat with that for a moment longer than usual. I did not investigate. I did not pull extra records or search for connections. That is not how the job works. I made a note. I followed procedure. When something looks off, you flag it and move it along. That is how systems protect themselves. The first escalation came quietly. The bank sent a routine request for verification. A standard step. Nothing dramatic. Just a letter asking for confirmation of an authorization tied to a previous transaction. The second escalation came a week later when the transaction was placed on hold pending clarification. That is when people start to feel nervous. Holds interrupt plans. They delay things that were already counted on. The third escalation pushed everything closer to a breaking point. An audit was opened and a request for an appearance or statement was issued. Not a courtroom, not police. Just a formal request that required time and honesty. That is often enough to crack a story built on convenience. Through all of this, I stayed where I was supposed to be. I did not call anyone. I did not warn my parents. I did not insert myself. I kept my voice neutral at work and my notes precise. Inside, I felt a familiar ache, not satisfaction, not relief, something closer to grief. I did not want them ruined. I wanted them honest. I had wanted that since I was a kid, standing in the kitchen holding a pen while my dad told me where to sign. Back then, I was 16 or 17 and did not know what authorized contact meant beyond being helpful. I had signed confirmation forms because I was told to. I had been listed on documents because it made things easier. I did not understand that ease for them meant exposure for me later. Sitting at my desk years later, I could see the line clearly. Family values sound solid until they are tested by a compliance checklist. The system does not care who you are trying to protect. It cares what was done and when. When the audit notice went out, the house I grew up in felt smaller in my memory. I imagined my dad reading the letter with his jaw tight, and my mom trying to smooth it over with words. I imagined my sister insisting it was nothing, and that it would blow over. I did not imagine any of them telling the truth right away. That is the pattern. Delay until someone else fixes it. Only this time, no one did. The value point became impossible to ignore. I had been listed as an authorized contact years ago without fully understanding the weight of that role. I had been pushed to sign confirmation pages because it kept things moving. That small detail had been invisible to everyone until the moment it mattered most. Now it was the hinge everything turned on. I kept doing my job. I kept my files clean. I kept my life small and orderly. This was where the lie stopped being personal and started being expensive. The moment everything surfaced did not happen in a courtroom or with raised voices. It happened in a place built for patience and paperwork. The county recorder office on a weekday morning where the chairs are bolted to the floor and the air smells like old paper and coffee. People sat with folders on their laps waiting for numbers to be called. Couples whispered. Retirees stared at the wall. This was the kind of place where reputations quietly meet reality. My parents were there because the audit required in-person clarification. A conference room had been booked off the lobby with a long table and a clock that ticked too loud. 2 clerks and a supervisor laid out documents in a neat row. No one accused anyone. They simply read the timeline out loud. Dates, forms, signatures. When December 26, 2017 was spoken, it landed differently than the other dates. The supervisor asked for the original authorization page. The clerk placed it next to the revised copy and asked Ray to confirm the signature. He leaned forward and his voice caught. He said it looked like his, but also not exactly. He grew defensive fast. He said the system was wrong and that families do paperwork together all the time. The supervisor nodded and asked Judy a direct question about who was present that day. Judy did not answer right away. Silence can be louder than denial. She looked down at her hands and then back up at the page as if it might explain itself. The supervisor asked again. Judy said she did not remember. That was the second escalation. The room tightened. Then Marlo was asked to step in because her name appeared as a witness on a later form. She walked in confident and smiling and started explaining how she had helped keep things moving when I left. She said I had been irresponsible and that she had stepped up. The clerk asked her to clarify why the signature timestamp showed edits after submission. Marlo paused. Her story shifted. The narrative about me being difficult and careless began to unravel under simple questions. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. The process did the work. I was not supposed to be there, and I did not announce myself. I was in the lobby submitting unrelated paperwork for work when I heard my last name spoken through the open door. I stopped walking. I stood with my folder held against my chest and watched through the glass as the story they had told for years lost its shape. My dad stammered and tried to take control of the conversation. My mom stayed quiet and pale. My sister looked around as if waiting for someone to rescue her with a better explanation. No one did. The supervisor summarized what needed to happen next and explained the implications of the altered document and the necessity of accurate statements. The meeting ended with instructions and consequences spelled out calmly. When the door opened, they stepped into the lobby and saw people they knew from church and from the credit union and from the neighborhood. Faces that had smiled at them for years now held recognition and something else. Understanding. The humiliation was not loud. It was precise. It was the look that says, "Now I see." I did not say a word. I turned in my paperwork and walked past them as if they were strangers. My presence was accidental and unavoidable and enough. As I reached the exit, I heard my dad call my name and stop himself. The value point was clear in that room. Truth does not need drama. It needs witnesses and a process. Do not click away. This next part is exactly what Get Out cost them. The call came 3 days after the meeting, and I knew who it was before I picked up because the phone rang longer than usual. My dad, Ray, sounded different right away, softer, careful. He did not start with anger or blame. He started with need. He said he just needed a little help to clear something up and that it would not take long. He said families do this for each other. I listened without interrupting and noticed how he avoided saying my name at first. A few hours later, my mom Judy texted that she missed me and hoped I was safe and asked if we could talk. She added a heart at the end, like punctuation could soften years of silence. That evening, my sister Marlo sent a message saying she had tried to protect me and that things had gotten out of hand, and that she hoped we could fix this together. The timing was not subtle. None of them mentioned the lie. None of them apologized for the night I was told to leave. They all circled the same point without naming it. They needed something from me. I waited a day before responding because urgency belongs to the person who made the mess. When I did answer, I kept it short. I told my dad that he had told me to get out and that I had done exactly that. I told him I no longer signed things for anyone else. I told my mom that missing me was not the same as taking responsibility. I told my sister that protecting someone does not involve letting a lie stand. There was no explanation beyond that. Boundaries do not need essays. The silence afterward was heavy but brief. Consequences do not wait for emotional closure. The transaction they were trying to salvage failed. The refinance fell through, and a penalty followed because timelines had been missed, and statements had been incomplete. It was not dramatic, it was administrative. My dad stepped down from the committee he had served on for years because attention is uncomfortable when questions linger. People did not confront him. They stopped asking for his opinion. That is how community pressure works at that age. My mom stopped volunteering for a while and avoided places where she might run into people who knew the details. My sister went quiet online. None of this was revenge. It was math. When you remove the person who kept the paper straight, the paper starts telling its own story. I did not feel victorious. I felt steady. There is a difference. The value of that moment landed slowly. Some parents want a relationship only when they need a witness. They do not reach out to know you. They reach out to use your presence to legitimize their version of events. Apologies that arrive with paperwork are not apologies. They are requests. I did not accept them. I did not gloat. I returned to my routines and my work, and the life I had built without asking them for anything. If you have ever been asked to fix what you did not break, you will understand this. After everything settled, the loudest change in my life was how quiet it became. I was 25, and my days looked ordinary in the best way. I paid my bills on time and cooked simple meals that did not need an audience. I met friends for coffee and left early when I felt tired. I kept my work steady and my weekends predictable. There was no urge to prove anything to anyone. Stability is not exciting, but it is deeply comforting when you have lived without it. I learned that self-respect shows up in small choices like saying no without apologizing and keeping promises to yourself. I did not move back home, and I did not wait for invitations. I kept my circle small and kind. I dated someone patient who listened more than he spoke and understood silence as a form of trust. We laughed at small things and planned weeks ahead instead of years. That felt right. Looking back, I understand now that getting kicked out did not ruin my life. It removed me from their cover story. It stopped me from being the quiet fixer who made everything look fine from the outside. Justice did not come with shouting or punishment. It came with the truth being allowed to stand on its own, and with boundaries that did not bend under pressure. The system did not take sides. It followed rules. That was enough. The secret power I never talked about was not dramatic. Over time and with discipline, I bought a small house. Nothing flashy. A place that needed paint and patience. I saved for it without telling anyone and signed the papers myself. No co-signer, no family help. I also built a modest savings account that let me sleep at night. A mentor at work noticed my consistency and trusted me with more responsibility. Doors opened quietly. The wow moment was realizing I no longer needed my parents' approval or my sister's version of events. I had built a life that worked without them. I did not send photos. I did not announce milestones. I let peace speak for itself. Sometimes I think about that Christmas and the things I wanted but could not afford. There was a band poster I loved that winter and never bought. Years later, I found it at a flea market and framed it in my living room. It turns out some things are worth waiting for. If any part of this story felt like your life, tell me what you would do and take care of your heart.